As we approach the 2026 midterms, we're looking at a highly unusual collision. We have rapidly shifting public sentiment running headfirst into the static, defensive power of institutional map-making. Macroeconomic drag, geopolitical friction, and sweeping judicial changes are all converging right now, creating an incredibly unpredictable electoral environment.
To really grasp the gravity of this moment, we first need to look at how financial markets are assessing the risk. Right now, major prediction platforms are pricing a Democratic flip of the House of Representatives at 79 cents. That implies a 79% probability of a change in chamber control. Now, it's vital to recognize this isn't a guaranteed outcome, but rather a striking, quantifiable signal. Professional traders are risking real capital to synthesize micro-events, everything from jobs reports to overseas conflicts, and they're identifying a structural decay in the narrow 220 to 215 Republican majority.
And this market confidence is deeply tethered to a seismic polling shift right in the middle of the electorate. Independent voters, who traditionally decide the balance of the House, have aggressively swung to a 19-point preference for Democrats. We're also seeing groups that were split early in the cycle moving fast. Hispanic voters now show a staggering 35-point margin, alongside a 21-point advantage among women. The toss-up equilibrium that really defined the start of this cycle is rapidly dissolving.
Section 1. Geopolitics and economic drag, the macroeconomic friction.
To understand why this coalition is fracturing, we have to look at the psychology of the electorate, and specifically what analysts are calling the jobs paradox. In April 2026, the U.S. economy added 115,000 jobs, comfortably beating forecasts. Yet simultaneously, consumer sentiment hit a fresh record low, and unemployment remains stubbornly high at 4.3%. For the 40% of voters who rank the economy as their top issue, a surprisingly robust job growth number on paper is simply failing to offset the daily financial anxiety of living in a war-impacted economy.
When we look under the hood of that jobs report, a distinct structural weakness appears. The Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, has initiated massive federal workforce reductions. Since the cycle began, 348,000 federal jobs have been eliminated, with 9,000 cut in April alone. So while sectors like healthcare and retail are gaining, this aggressive restructuring has created a profound softness in the middle-tier professional and information sectors, and that is directly fueling economic unease.
This domestic unease is being heavily compounded by a severe geopolitical drag. Fully 60% of Americans now disapprove of the ongoing military conflict in Iran. Why does this matter so much domestically? Because it's spiked energy prices and deepened an already painful cost of living crisis for the average voter. Politically, this has fractured the incumbent coalition, with 22% of the Republican base now expressing the belief that the U.S. global position has deteriorated.
Section 2. The legislative record, governance by crisis.
Institutional actions are taking those economic anxieties and compounding them. The Republican majority's legislative record has inadvertently created a highly tangible narrative for challengers. Tracing the timeline, the 2025 passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill initiated historic Medicaid cuts, and that was followed closely by the expiration of ACA premium tax credits. This all culminated in January 2026 with a historic 40-day government shutdown. For swing district voters, this sequence of legislative friction has become a central focal point.
Taking a step back to analyze the psychology of the 2026 voter, we're observing a phenomenon of deep governance fatigue. Polls indicate a massive 74% voter enthusiasm rate for the upcoming midterms. However, this high engagement isn't necessarily rooted in ideological fervor or deep affection for the opposition party. Rather, it's fundamentally driven by exhaustion with the status quo and a very practical desire to impose a divided government check on the current administration.
Section 3. The institutional firewall. Judicial redistricting as defense.
But public sentiment alone doesn't dictate congressional control. We need to examine the structural defense the GOP is actively building in the judiciary. In April 2026, the Supreme Court handed down a landmark 6-3 ruling in Louisiana versus Calais. This decision essentially flipped established civil rights logic on its head. It determined that states are not required to draw majority-minority districts, and in fact, it prohibits using race as a districting criterion unless there is clear proof of recent and intentional discrimination. This handed state mapmakers unprecedented leverage right ahead of the midterms.
And Southern legislatures have moved rapidly to utilize this ruling to construct an institutional firewall. We're seeing a coordinated effort to crack Democratic-leaning districts.
Mississippi has announced a special session to dismantle its only reliably Democratic seat. Tennessee is moving to split Memphis. Louisiana is eliminating its second majority black district. Each of these actions is a carefully calculated maneuver to secure additional Republican seats and insulate the majority from those national polling trends we just discussed.
There is, however, a hidden strategic vulnerability in this approach. Cracking a district is a double-edged sword. When mapmakers dismantle a safely Democratic district, those Democratic voters don't just disappear. They get dispersed into surrounding previously safe Republican districts. By absorbing these voters, the safe Republican margins naturally shrink. In a neutral environment, this works perfectly. But in a wave environment where the opposition holds a 10-point generic lead, these newly competitive Republican seats suddenly become highly vulnerable to flipping.
Section 4. The Battleground Collision, the 42-District War.
This brings us to the ultimate battlefield, which is currently being reshaped by a staggering wave of exits. Right now, 56 incumbents are retiring from the House. Think about that for a second. This mass departure is fundamentally stripping away the incumbency advantage, which historically is one of the most reliable predictors of electoral success.
The asymmetry of these retirements is what's particularly revealing. 36 Republicans are exiting, compared to just 20 Democrats. This disparity highlights a profound shift in internal incentives. Veteran GOP lawmakers are analyzing the institutional headwinds, the polling data, and the grueling legislative environment, and they're choosing to walk away from the hill rather than fight a deeply uphill battle to retain their seats.
Grounding this analysis in the micro battlegrounds, we can see exactly how this plays out financially. Control of the chamber will likely come down to roughly 42 highly contested districts. In places like Arizona's 6th and Wisconsin's 3rd, districts won by razor-thin margins back in 2024, Democratic challengers are converting grassroots urgency into massive financial hauls. We're actually seeing challengers outraising sitting Republican incumbents, effectively neutralizing the traditional financial benefits of holding office.
Yet it's absolutely crucial to maintain a balanced perspective on the broader financial war. While individual Democratic challengers are surging, the Republican institutional infrastructure remains highly resilient. Looking at the Q1 receipts, the Republican National Congressional Committee raised a record-breaking $47.1 million, slightly outpacing their Democratic counterparts. The defending party retains a significant super PAC gap, proving they still have the institutional artillery required to defend their most vital territory.
This structural resilience reminds us of a fundamental rule of forecasting. A 79% probability is not 100% certainty. A really common misconception is that prediction markets have somehow decided the election. They haven't. A 21% chance of Republicans holding the House remains a highly viable path in high-stakes politics. Furthermore, Democrats face a persistent too liberal hurdle among moderate voters. If the political conversation shifts away from the economy and foreign policy and pivots back toward cultural issues, that 79% market confidence could evaporate very quickly.
As we weigh the dynamic force of public sentiment against the static power of institutional map-making, it forces an unresolved question for our modern political system. In an era where just 42 micro-battlegrounds dictate everything, has the map become more powerful than the voter? I'm genuinely curious about your strategic perspective on this. Looking at the data we've unpacked, do you predict the 10-point national polling lead will break through the GOP's judicial firewall, or will institutional fundraising and redrawn district lines ultimately hold the majority? Share your analytical predictions below.
An investment in knowledge pays the best interest, so why not invest in this channel? Click like and subscribe for more.